The rain battered the city streets as Clara Evans, 62, stumbled out of the university library at 1 a.m. Her eyes stung from hours spent under fluorescent lights, grading papers and preparing lectures. For 35 years, she'd been a beacon of knowledge, a literature professor whose passion for stories inspired thousands of students. But tonight, her steps faltered. Her heart raced unnaturally, her vision blurred, and the world tilted. She gripped a lamppost, gasping, as the city's hum faded into a deafening silence. Clara collapsed, her briefcase spilling papers into the wet street. This wasn't just exhaustion, it was her body screaming for a change she'd ignored for too long. Since her wife, Lena, passed away 8 months ago, Clara had buried herself in work, avoiding the empty house they'd shared for decades. As she lay on the cold pavement, a stranger's voice pierced the fog. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Clara woke in a hospital bed, the sterile scent and rhythmic beeping grounding her. Dr. Patel, a young doctor with kind eyes, sat beside her. "You had a panic attack, compounded by severe fatigue and dehydration. You're pushing yourself too hard, Professor Evans." Clara tried to protest, but her voice cracked. Her daughter, Sophie, burst into the room, her face a mix of fear and frustration. "Mom, you can't keep doing this. You haven't been home in days. You're not eating, not sleeping. Lena wouldn't want this." Clara's chest tightened at the mention of Lena's name. She hadn't just lost her partner, she'd lost her anchor, her reason to come home. The hospital kept her for 2 days, forcing her to face the truth: she couldn't outrun her grief forever. Discharged with strict orders to take a 3-month sabbatical, Clara returned to her apartment. The silence was suffocating. The cozy space, once filled with Lena's laughter and the smell of her cooking, now felt like a museum of memories. The bookshelves they'd built together, the armchair where Lena read poetry, the kitchen table where they planned their future, all were untouched since her death. Clara avoided the bedroom, sleeping on the couch instead. She couldn't face Lena's side of the bed, where her scarf still lay, folded neatly as if she'd return any moment. Clara's days blurred into a haze of coffee and old lecture notes, her only escape from the void. Her son, Michael, called daily, urging her to visit, but Clara deflected. She wasn't ready to face her children's pity or their questions about her future. One evening, desperate to distract herself, Clara opened a closet to sort through Lena's clothes. Each item was a time capsule: the red dress Lena wore to their 25th anniversary, the wool scarf from their trip to Ireland. Clara's hands trembled as she pulled out a leather jacket, Lena's favorite. As she held it, a small envelope slipped from the pocket. Inside was a key and a note in Lena's elegant handwriting: "Willow Lane, 142. Our next chapter awaits." Clara's breath caught. She vaguely remembered Lena mentioning a surprise before her sudden stroke, but grief had buried the memory. What was at Willow Lane? Why had Lena hidden this? Clara spent the night researching the address. Willow Lane was in a quiet suburb, 45 minutes from the city, known for its tree-lined streets and charming bungalows. It was the kind of place they'd dreamed of retiring to, where they could garden, read, and grow old together. The next morning, Clara drove there, her heart pounding with curiosity and dread. The city's concrete jungle gave way to green lawns and blooming flowers. Willow Lane was even lovelier than she'd imagined, with quaint houses and gardens bursting with color. Number 142 was a single-story cottage with a wraparound porch, its paint faded but warm, like a hug from the past. Clara hesitated, then used the key. The door creaked open, revealing a cozy interior bathed in soft light. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but alive with potential. A fireplace anchored the living room, and a small dining area overlooked a backyard garden. On the dining table sat a vase of wilted flowers and an envelope from a real estate agency. Clara's hand shook as she opened it. The deed was in both their names, dated a month before Lena's death. A note from the realtor read: "As per Ms. Lena's instructions, the house is ready for you and Professor Evans to move in." Clara sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. This was Lena's final gift, their dream home, a place to start anew. But how could she live here without her? Clara spent hours in the cottage, wandering through each room. The kitchen had a sunny nook perfect for morning coffee, just as Lena had always wanted. The bedroom had space for their old bookcases, and the backyard was a tangle of roses and lavender, waiting to be revived. Every corner screamed of the life they'd planned but never got to live. Clara found a photo album on a shelf, filled with pictures of their life together, their first date, their wedding, trips with Sophie and Michael. Tucked inside was a letter from Lena. "My love, this house is for us. You always said you wanted a garden to tend, a porch to read on. I found this place for our next adventure. Don't let work steal this from us. Live here, Clara, with or without me." The words broke her. Lena had known her better than anyone, had seen her tendency to hide and work, and had planned this to pull her back to life. Clara drove home, the letter clutched in her hand. She sat on her apartment couch, staring at the walls that no longer felt like home. The cottage was a promise, but it was also a challenge. Could she leave the city, her career, her routine? Could she face a future without Lena? The questions kept her awake, but for the first time in months, she felt a spark of purpose. The next week, Clara made a decision. She called Sophie and Michael, telling them about the cottage. They were stunned but supportive, offering to help her move. Clara spent days packing her apartment, each box a step toward letting go. She donated Lena's clothes but kept the leather jacket, a piece of her to carry forward. Moving day was bittersweet. Sophie and Michael arrived with their families, filling the cottage with chatter and laughter. The grandchildren ran through the garden, chasing butterflies, while Clara unpacked books and photos. The house began to feel alive, not just a relic of what could have been. Clara hired a local gardener to teach her how to care for the roses and lavender. Her hands, used to turning pages and typing lectures, learned to dig soil and prune branches. The physical work was grounding, a contrast to the mental strain of her old life. She set up a small office in the spare bedroom, volunteering to mentor students online a few hours a week. Medicine wasn't her calling, but teaching still gave her joy, and she found balance in doing it on her terms. The cottage became a gathering place. Sundays turned into family days, with Sophie bringing her husband and kids, and Michael arriving with his partner. The dining table, once empty, now overflowed with food and stories. Clara watched her grandchildren play, their laughter echoing Lena's. She began to share stories of their grandmother, keeping her memory alive without the sting of grief. Sophie noticed the change. "Mom, you're smiling again," she said one evening. Clara nodded, realizing it was true. The cottage wasn't just a house, it was a bridge to her family, to herself. Clara also reconnected with old friends, inviting them to the cottage for tea or book club meetings. The porch became her sanctuary, where she read poetry and sipped chamomile tea, Lena's favorite. She hung a windscreen Lena had loved, its soft melody a reminder of her presence. Slowly, Clara's life filled with new routines, ones that honored the past but embraced the present. Point 7. Facing the future. One morning, while tending the garden, Clara found a small notebook buried under a rosebush. It was Lena's, filled with sketches of the cottage and notes about plants she wanted to grow. The final page read, "For Clara, my heart. Plant these roses, live this life. I'm always with you." Clara cried, but the tears were different now, less about loss, more about love. She planted the roses Lena had chosen, each bloom a step toward healing. She began writing again, not lectures but stories, weaving her grief and hope into words. Her first story was about a woman finding a new home after loss, a cathartic release of her journey. Clara's sabbatical ended, but she chose not to return to full-time teaching. Instead, she taught part-time, focusing on creative writing workshops. Her students loved her stories, and she found joy in guiding them to find their own voices. The cottage became a hub for creativity, hosting small writing groups under the porch's soft light. The neighborhood welcomed Clara. She met neighbors who shared her love of gardening and books. One, an elderly widow named Ruth, became a close friend. They spent evenings on Clara's porch, swapping stories of love and loss. Ruth taught Clara how to bake Lena's favorite lemon cake, and Clara shared her poetry. The cottage became a place of connection, not just for family but for a community that understood her journey. Clara started a small book drive, collecting novels for local schools, a project Lena would have loved. The act of giving back gave Clara purpose, filling the void left by her old life. The grandchildren began calling the cottage Grandma's Story House, a name that stuck. They loved hearing Clara's tales, both real and imagined, and she began writing children's stories for them. The first, about a magical garden that healed broken hearts, was a hit at their school's story time. Clara felt Lena's spirit in every word, guiding her forward. A year after finding the key, Clara stood in her garden, now vibrant with roses, lavender, and tulips. The cottage was no longer a dream but a home, filled with laughter, love, and new memories. She'd transformed the spare room into a library, lined with books she and Lena had collected. On Lena's birthday, Clara hosted a small gathering, reading one of Lena's poems to her family and friends. It was a celebration of life, not a mourning of loss. Clara felt whole again, not because the grief was gone, but because she'd learned to carry it differently. She began planning a trip to Ireland, a place she and Lena had loved. This time, she'd take Sophie and Michael, sharing the places that had meant so much to their family. The cottage would be waiting when they returned, a constant in her new life. Clara realized that Lena's gift wasn't just the house, it was the courage to keep living, to find joy in the ordinary. One evening, Clara sat on the porch, Lena's jacket draped over her shoulders. The wind chimes sang softly, and the stars glittered above. She held a cup of chamomile tea, its warmth a comfort. "Thank you, Lena," she whispered, feeling her wife's presence in the breeze. The cottage had given Clara a new beginning, a place to heal and grow. She was no longer the woman collapsing in the rain, lost in grief. She was Clara Evans, professor, writer, grandmother, friend, a woman who'd found her purpose again. Clara's story spread through her writing, inspiring others to find light after loss. Her workshops grew, and she began mentoring young writers, sharing the lessons Lena's gift had taught her. The cottage stood as a testament to love's enduring power, a place where stories were born, and hearts were mended. As the sun set, Clara smiled, ready for whatever came next, knowing Lena was with